introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending upon your time zone. Welcome to the Practicing Democracy Voter Education and Engagement Workshop Series. My name is Ellen Knudsen. I'm the program manager for Practicing Democracy, and I'm joined today by Kathy Copeland, the director of the American Democracy Project. We're really excited to see you all here. Today, we're going to be talking about including deliberative dialogues into the classroom. As we're getting started, maybe folks can give a quick introduction in chat, just your name, where you're zooming in from. I'm zooming in from Portland, Oregon. It's still first thing in the morning for me. You might see me sip on some coffee. But I'm super thrilled that we have Kara Lindeman and Kara Dillard here with us. It's the Kara Show today. Unfortunately, Vertus Robinson, who is the president of NIFI, who was originally scheduled to join us, is stuck on a shuttle in a storm in Puerto Rico. So the travel gods were not smiling, and so he is unable to join us today, but is with us in spirit. Before I turn things over to the Karas, I did want to say a few words about our series. We're in our third month of this series. We did it in February and March, and in this month, we're really kind of trying to focus on building campus community ties and ways to integrate voter education into the classroom, including through deliberative dialogue like today's, and really continuing to showcase speakers and projects and stimulate good conversation, that it will help provide critical resources to our campuses so we can develop capacity and a strong campus commitment to a healthy democracy. If you have missed any of the workshops in February or March, or ones earlier in April, they are all recorded and they're on our website. At the end of today's session, I will highlight a few of the upcoming ones, but I'm going to put into chat here. Oh, I sent it to the waiting room. I will try to send it now to the meeting here. So where you can sign up and find the recordings for the ones that we missed. Kathy, do you want to say a few things about the CLDE and the ADP meeting in Detroit?
Sure. Happy to do that. Thank you so much, Ellen. As she said, I'm Kathy Copeland, the director of the American Democracy Project. And each year, in coordination with NASPA, we host the Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement Conference. This year, it will be in Detroit from June 5th through June 7th. And we hope that you all can join us. I'll put a link into the chat for you to find more information there. As part of this meeting, we also have an ADP meeting, which will be on June 4th, the day before the formal kickoff of CLDE. And we invite all AASCU members to join us at that particular meeting, where we'll dive into some of the findings that we've been able to glean from this series of Practicing Democracy, and talk a little bit more about how we can build strategic timelines as we move forward within the voter engagement work and larger civic engagement work too. So grateful to have Kara and Kara, both very dear friends, joining us on this call as we look at deliberative dialogues. And I'll send it back to Ellen.
Thanks, Kathy. So now I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters. Kara Lindeman is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Winona State University in Minnesota. The college leads the campus community to consider the most pressing issues of the day for multiple perspectives, proven high impact learning practices, and shared experiences. She has long been involved with the National Issues Forums Institute and holding deliberative dialogues, and is a great friend and a all around wonderful person. As is the other Kara, Kara Dillard. I'm like so thrilled to have the two Karas here together and hanging out with us today. Kara Dillard is an assistant professor in the School of Communication Studies at James Madison University and the associate director of the university's Madison Center for Civic Engagement. Also is currently the board chair of NIFI, and has been involved with deliberative dialogues for a long time, including having deliberative dialogues online, so not just in the face-to-face. You all didn't sign up to this to listen to me, though. You came to hear from the Karas. So I will stop my screen share and kick things over to Kara Lindeman.
So good morning, good afternoon. Wherever you are zooming from, I am located in southeast Minnesota on the lovely Mississippi River. So my name is Kara. Shocking, I know. It is a pleasure to meet you. If we recognize many of your names, some of them are new. Anyone want to give like a thumbs up if they're familiar with not only the work of deliberative democracy, but maybe also the National Issues Forum Institute? Brilliant. Look at that. That's lovely to see. So so we apologize if this is repetitive for some of you, but I think that this will be a great introduction, not only to what kinds of support institutions and resources, and more importantly, people are out there to develop and to invite into your network, but also a general understanding of deliberative practice. I just have to be honest with you. So Kara is not a frequent name, right? Especially spelled with a K. And I had the pleasure of meeting Kara Dillard probably, goodness, wasn't it before like the 2008 election?
I think so, yes.
And so you remember the monumental 2008 election, all of us, right? And so it's only fitting that we're talking about or reconnecting right now before the upcoming 2024 election. And at the time, I was here in Minnesota at Winona State, and Kara Dillard was in Alaska at University of Alaska Fairbanks. So if we want to really experiment and model what it means to talk across differences, different lived experiences, multiple perspectives across politically, socially, geographically, you name it, well, why don't we hold a deliberation between our students here in Minnesota and Kara's students in Alaska, right? And quite frankly, Kara, I mean, you can certainly speak to this, but it really was a pilot because, fast forward 2024, we know kind of how to set it up, what to do, what to expect. But back in 2008, we were really just winging it.
I think winging it is the appropriate term to use because I think we were, back at that time, we were worried about how does the technology work? How do we make sure that like we can transcend time zones? I was 2 hours behind. I would say other than our students' penchant for like cold weather, what did our students have in common? Could they even really have a conversation together, much less deliberate about whatever the topic was that we chose? But it was certainly I think my students, one of their most transformative experiences in my classroom, that they just deeply appreciated being able to hear, their own experiences being, supported by those living in Minnesota. They appreciated being able to hear that, oh, wait a minute, those out in Minnesota are doing things, they're experiencing it differently. Oh, that's really interesting. And they all of my students said, Kara, you could talk about yours, that how much they just really appreciated being able to be in that space, talking with people that they wouldn't normally be able to hear from, and having really an adult conversation, and my student evaluations at the end, everybody talked about it, and so I really appreciated that. They talked about it positively.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. And, I think also, Kara, we developed it as part of our professional portfolio. And so, as we travel through the trajectory of higher education and kind of navigating through this rocky landscape, I think we're all looking for professional joys in our life. And I would say that meeting Kara, really in being introduced to deliberative practice, and then embedding it not only in our work as a teacher, but also as a scholar, has really sustained us and really provided that incentive to keep pushing forward. So I would ask, or I would invite all of you to please ask, questions when you have them, and we are happy to answer them, because it's not like Kara and I know everything by any means. We are also, just like you, experimenting with our students, challenged by students to develop new strategies for student success. When I think about that, Kara, when I think about those students from 2008 in that class, I could take all like 10 of them and tell you where they are and the difference they're making in the world today. And I am not sure how impactful. I would like to assume, right, that was the transformational exercise. However, we want to embed these democratic practices to give students that efficacious agency. And I think this is certainly one of many, right, ways to do that. Before we get started and hear more from my good friend Kara, I just wanted to talk a little bit, and I would invite Kathy Copeland to step into this space if she has certainly the expertise and the experience to add. But in terms of our practice here, right, on these different kind of scaffolding levels, we want you to be aware that AASCU is undergoing a new curriculum development called Leading for Democracy. And so what many of you know, and I'm sure many of you have participated in, they have leadership development programs in higher education for our AASCU member institutions and our AASCU people. We have been charged with developing curriculum for presidents and provosts called Leading for Democracy. Now, how special is that, right? To develop 8 modules that presidents and provosts would be invited to participate in these cohorts, and deliberative practice is central to those training elements and really, right, found within the DNA of all of those modules. So I invite your feedback of what you also think, like, what does it mean to lead for democracy? And does this align with those kinds of messaging? So without further ado, Kara, Dillard, or Kathy, did you want to add anything to those, to that work?
No, we can get straight into Kara's.
Okay,
Yes.
Sorry, yes. Kara Dillard, would you like to, I'll pass it to you, please.
Thank you, Kara. So it's always wonderful to be here with Kara, with Kathy, with Ellen, and with all of you to talk about how do we embed deliberation in our classrooms. I've got a PowerPoint. I'll get there in a minute. You don't need to look at my slides the entire time. But I'm Kara Dillard. I am a faculty, like Ellen said, here at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Shout out to all my other Virginia colleagues who are here on the call too. We're a large, a 20,000 student university, about 2 hours-ish outside of Washington, D.C., in a really kind of rural location. It's a wonderful place. I am a communication studies professor, but I'm a sociologist by training. And one of the wonderful things I think about the example that Kara and I shared at the beginning, where we paired our students, is that Kara is a political scientist and is taught in the MPA program. I am a sociologist and was doing this with my sociology students. So not only were we connecting students from Alaska and Minnesota, but we were doing this across disciplines. And so asking our students to step outside of their disciplinary boundaries and thinking about and talking through and bearing their own disciplinary experiences to talk about an issue. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that deliberation can do, is it's not constrained by a particular disciplinary set of knowledges or concepts, but that can be done in any classroom. I've had, I think I'll call it the privilege of teaching in sociology departments. That's where I was at the University of Alaska. And I would embed deliberation in, my intro to sociology and social problems class. I would teach students how to facilitate these dialogues in my 400 level capstone class. So students got the experience from being a participant to then leading as a peer these kinds of conversations. I know Kara does something similar as well. And then when I came here, in other institutions, I was at places before I got to JMU, I would teach and embed deliberation in a 200 plus person social problems class, so a really large lecture class, and then in classes from sociology of the environment, social movements. So all of that is to say that no matter what your discipline is, no matter what the class that you're particularly teaching in, there's a way to take the framework of deliberating, of asking students to think about what can we do, but also given that there's a set of drawbacks to this, are we still willing to do those things? How do we think about the drawbacks and the trade-offs of particular actions? And are we willing to live with those? That basic idea transcends disciplines, it transcends classes. You have to get creative when you've got 200 students that you're trying to do with it. And I'm absolutely happy to talk about that. But it's really, I think the really wonderful thing about these things is that you can do it in any classroom, and it's beneficial in any classroom. I'll share one experience, and then I could talk about specifics. A couple of years ago, I think this might have been the semester after COVID hit, or maybe it was a semester of COVID. I can't remember COVID time, somewhere around there. I was teaching our basic public speaking class, which is, for many students, the bane of their first year college experience. But I love it. I enjoy it. I taught it at 8 a.m. even. And I had a student walk up to me on the very first day of class, as students are, kind of trained to do nowadays. They go up, they shake your hand, they introduce yourself. Hopefully they say they're excited to take your class. Sometimes they don't, but the good ones do. And I had a student say, hi, I'm Kara. I'm, happy to be here in your class. I'm also a Republican. I said, I'd never had that happen to me before. I didn't kind of know what to, I don't even know what I said really. Like, hi, I'm also, I'm Kara, like long walks on the beach, Sagittarius. I don't know. Right. But I think I said, oh, okay, great. Nice to meet you. But clearly, and talking to this student later, I think she really reflected when she came to college, this narrative that college wasn't for her, that college wasn't a safe place for her to share her political opinions in classes, and that the kinds of opinions that she had and that she deeply believed in would be rejected by professors, would be rejected by her peers. But I embedded deliberation in my basic public speaking class, and we did a deliberation in class. I sent them as a part of a required assignment kind of partway through the class that they had to participate in. And at the end of doing that second deliberation midway through the semester, the student came back and said, this was wonderful, that I went to this deliberation and I thought I wouldn't hear anybody have an opinion like me. I thought I would be shouted out of the room, but I felt listened to. I heard other people share similar opinions as me. And we had a real meaningful conversation about whatever the topic was. And she was just so impressed. And I really love to say that, I hope that experience of deliberating in a classroom was a spark for this student to think that there can be a different way of talking about politics, about issues, and that hopefully gave her some way to think that maybe we can do politics differently, that there's a place for all opinions in our classes, and that embedding deliberation is one way where faculty can hopefully provide a structure and support for doing those kinds of things extremely well. All of that is to say, I know that sometimes it can be scary because if you don't have training in deliberation, you're like, well, how the holy heck do I even do this? This seems overwhelming. I don't know, Kara, let me ask you, how did you like first get into this? How did you did you take a class in college that was facilitating NIPI forums? Like, how did you, what was your experience? How did you do this?
So thank you for the question, Kara, because you mentioned that like I'm a recovering political scientist, right? So if you know, like people who study politics, a lot of people get into law or politics because they'll make like some excuse. Well, I like to argue a lot, right? And I'm very opinionated. Or I heard someone, a prospective student the other day said, yeah, I want to be a legal studies major. And I said, oh, that's amazing. Why? And she said, because I like to argue and I like to win. So if you go, so my, I don't know how to say this, my well-being is not really, I hope, dependent on zero-sum games, right? And so in my realm of political science, like I thought, yeah, we can teach, I can debate, been a debater, we can do all this, but what really brings, I mentioned joy, but what brings a sustained practice to really improve our lives and the lives of our families, our friends, our neighbors, our community. And we're finding more and more, right, that Gen Z is looking, how do we make a difference to improve this world? And so I started looking, well, what are the ways in which we can build civic skills with students to give them a way to talk, to approach, to engage in these really difficult, wicked public problems that matter the most to them. Many students, when they walk in the door, especially in politics, right? And in a politics space, it tends to be dominated by certain types of personalities and people. So many people just say, no, I don't talk about politics. My parents, we don't talk about politics. And that's so hurtful, right? Because these complex problems, we need everybody to be talking about politics. We need to make the table wider and bigger and more inviting because we need all hands on deck. And so how do we frame these issues to invite those people who haven't always been at the table to engage? And then how do we develop civic skills which they feel valued, affirmed, and heard? And deliberative practice really makes or creates these spaces where real, sustained, successful, effective learning can occur. Can I just give you an example? Kara, is that okay? You asked me a question and I just keep talking. I mean, we're talking about listening, but yep. Yeah. Can I give an example? So many of you were talking about in the classroom, but Kara mentioned like you can do it at an introductory level, right? You can scale it from a 25 person all the way, she said, like 50 to 100 people, and you can do it class discipline or you can do it university wide. So upcoming for this election, right? We want students to feel engaged. We don't want them to feel heard and engaged just on election day, right? We want them to grapple with those decisions and, as Kara said, those trade-offs before and after election day. And so how do you structure that on your campus? Well, I can tell you on our campus, I've been over at the student union, I can't even count how many times this week because we're grappling right now with those things of, students, there's tabling, right? You guys have tabling in open public spaces that some students feel are threatening to them. And so how do you, what are the trade-offs, right? With free speech, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so it's kind of this push, this kind of give, and it's not, how is it like a win for anyone? Right? We have to develop and frame issues and be able to talk about them given, accommodate trade-offs, right? How can we have joint games, shared spaces, and deliberative practice, I think really does this. And how important is this coming into election season when we're talking about fundamental values that we all share, right? The safety and security of our friends, our family, our neighbors, our communities. We can connect on that. Now, how do we, right, grapple, and how do we think about the real problems affecting our lives on a daily basis? Go ahead, Kara. Sorry, thank you.
So when I would do this in my classes, I would start, on week 1, maybe week 2 of the class, where we would use a National Issues Forum issue guide. I would facilitate the conversation, and we would sit, like if I'm in a smaller lecture hall, if I'm in a small class, we would sit together, all pony up, everybody create a circle in the room. I would assign an issue guide, and we would, on day 2 of the class, we would spend the entire 75 minutes of that class just doing a deliberation. And the idea is to get us all a similar experience about how this works, about how we're going to talk in the class, about the way we're going to talk about difficult issues in the class, and to give us a shared experience for how we can do these things. It was one of those times where, okay, day 1 is talking about the syllabus, what we're going to do in the class, but day 2 is actually, we're going to do this. And I would just assign a NIFI guide. I would have students read it. We would watch the starter video and use all of the ancillary NIF materials, and we would go forward. I would also then, again, midway through the semester, embed another deliberation assignment, whether that is me, again, facilitating it for the entire class, or having the class break into groups, smaller groups, however many that is, and have them self-facilitate using a NIFI issue guide. Those were required assignments. They would have to come to class on day 2, and they got credit. It was like a 0, it was 10 out of 10, you come and participate, you get the credit points. I'm not gonna assess for anything different than that. Same midway through. And then I would assign them at the end of the semester, we would do this again. And then, they would have to do a writing assignment that related to the project, or to deliberation. But I always started, and used deliberation to set the tone for the classroom, and day 1, day 2, day 3 of the semester. And that was always really helpful. That way, when it came time for students to self-facilitate, they saw me do it, and they got a sense of how to do it. What I love about, and I put a link in the chat, the NIFI and National Issues Forums guide, is that they're really straightforward. They give students a way of thinking about the issue that is nonpartisan, that has a variety of different viewpoints in them. And they're written so that no matter where a student is on the political ideological spectrum, they can see themselves at some point in the issue guide, and that students could take this. When I would teach a class of 200, in a large lecture hall, at the University of Washington, I would assign the issue guide day 2 of the class, and I would hand students a worksheet that had them write some notes down about how they talked about different issues. And then I would give them the issue guide and say, here's some basic questions that you all can think about in option 1, in option 2, in option 3, and they would self-facilitate it. I think one of the wonderful things about deliberation is that you can self-facilitate some of these conversations. You don't need to have a paid expert in the back of the room to do that, or a tenured professor to do that. But students have the ability to do this themselves by asking each other questions, by sharing their stories, by sharing their experiences, and then going forward. And so I always liked doing the right in the beginning of class, and then right in the end of class. And I think that's been really helpful. And so I almost exclusively, when I do this for students, will use NIFI issue guides. There's a variety of other projects. Living Room Conversations, for example, has wonderful issue guides. Some other organizations have really wonderful issue guides as well. It's just been, I've really enjoyed NIFI issue guides. So that's personal preference. I think that was, yeah. And so when I would do it, and again, in large lecture classes, I can't facilitate all of them. So I would break it up into small groups, and they would go. I oftentimes would set up, depending on the course that I would teach, would set up so that, every other Thursday was deliberation day. And we would go through the catalog of NIFI issue guides that might be related to the class. And every Thursday, students knew that we were going to deliberate. And so there was, you know, we don't do attendance points, but, you know, that they had to come and they had to be prepared. And, you know, sometimes they had to submit a question beforehand and whatnot. But every other Thursday was deliberating about these issues. And then at the end of the semester, there was some, you know, an assignment related to how, you know, how they think they've changed the way that they talk about politics, how they think differently about issues now, some other kinds of things. Kara, I don't know how you approached it, like the doing of it in your political science courses.
Yeah, I am really happy to share how we can outline that. And let me interject that I posted in the chat, I put a couple documents that we've used, and you can find them on the NIFI website, but a lot of us have to, if you're connected to ADP and the American Democracy Project, we're also federally mandated to recognize Constitution Day on September 17th or the week thereof. And so these are elements in which to link kind of democratic deliberation and NIFI guide with enduring constitutional questions. And so if you have any thoughts on those, we worked really hard in trying to develop you know, nonpartisan enduring questions linked not only to core constitutional thoughts or principles, but also using democratic deliberation. So please have at it. In terms of how we structured democratic deliberation on our classes, you know, quite frankly, friends, I used it from introduction all the way up to senior seminar classes, courses that were taught asynchronously online, courses that were taught hybrid. Anyway, I can say that overall, in general, it's been a very extremely positive experience. And if you travel through our program, you might be introduced to a democratic deliberation in like a larger 50-person introduction class. And then as students kind of not only gain experience in that classroom setting, but as they mature and are able to develop some better civic skills, then they evolve into moderators of those democratic deliberations. I can also give you a really good example of how we have done it synchronously or asynchronously, and to divide up the NIFI guides, because a lot of times if you look at the NIFI guides, they do the 3 options. And so it really, you know, you almost need like a 2-hour or, you know, once a week 3-credit class to do the full form at one sitting. So you can kind of dice it up by the 3 options. And we've had many faculty who would do like one option and use it more as like a discussion thread. And so that's a way in which you can do that asynchronously as well. We also train secondary teachers in social studies. So we call them pre-service social studies history teaching majors. I know, oh, it's a lot. But this has been an element of their education that when they go student teach and beyond, that they take these guides with them. And they do this in their student teaching, their clinicals. And then it is quite often I receive messages from our teachers in the field, our graduates in the field, and says, hey, I remember when I did the House Divided. Do you have that link that you could share with us? I want to do that with my class. For even more advanced courses, Kara, I'm sure you've done this too. We did a advanced elections course. And so we took the elections guide, and it was a voting behavior course, right? And we took the elections guide and we drilled it down to apply strictly to like the state of Minnesota and their practices. And it allowed students then to grapple with how would you frame these issues modeled after the NIFI way, but in a way that would engage community and be inclusive around them. So that's something also to consider, because I couldn't agree with Kara more, is that these guides are developed in a way to make them accessible and applicable, but then also flexible for whatever kinds of learning outcomes you may have in a particular course. And besides in the course, then I know many of you, in terms of your institutions and your organizations, you can scale that up. And we've also done that, taken those students who then become moderators from those fields, and then they would host, like on MLK Day, Day of Service, we would do a large deliberation over, perhaps we did one on immigration, right? On our Day of Service, certainly on Constitution Day, right? You could do a day of deliberation. Kara always does the national days of deliberation, where you can also do university-wide or across universities. So any of those ways you can do it. And you know, Kara, I was trying to think, you asked me like, what was the first time? And I mean, I'm just a political scientist, you know, Kara's the communication expert. So I really didn't know deliberative practice until I started practicing and learning. And for students, it's a different way to be engaged in really thoughtful conversation about very, very difficult issues and problems. It's a way to give them the tools to be brave, right? To enter into those conversations without, you know, many of us think we can't enter those conversations unless we already have the answer, right? Or already advocating for something. And this provides a way to introduce students to a lifetime of engagement.
And I think for faculty, you know, when I always talk with people who are very much interested in learning how to embed deliberation into their classroom, but the hurdle for not just how do you do it, how do you put in a syllabus, how do you create an assignment, but like how do you actually like make it happen in a class, is always one of the like tougher things to kind of think of yourself. I always try to say, like, go attend a deliberative forum, you know, see one actually happen in person. That helps. But absent that, I just put into the chat a facilitator guide that we just used on campus last week when we did a deliberative forum. And you can see like it's really bare bones. The meat and potatoes of that aren't some like highfalutin theory of like deliberation or a whole bunch of work. It's literally just the facilitator asking some questions and asking questions about, we could do this, but there's a trade-off, and are we willing to live with that? You know, we could do this. You know, is anybody worried that the trade-off might have some negative consequences for us, you know, for some people? You know, did you ever think about things this way? Those are things that as faculty, we already likely do in a class. If we use the Socratic method, for example, we're already embedding asking students questions. When I facilitate in a classroom a deliberative dialogue, I'm not really doing anything substantially different. I'm asking them questions. I'm trying to get them to think about what are the trade-offs, instead of just letting them all say, yes, we all agree, because students like to agree with each other. I try to get them to say, I like this, but oh, I didn't think about that consequence. Maybe I should think a little bit more about that. And we just do that by asking questions. So you can see, and you can, you know, this is a facilitator guide. You're more than welcome to make a copy for yourselves, download it. And it relates to the Youth and Opportunity Issue Guide that NIFI produced a few years ago, but it's all just questions. And so, you know, I open it up in my classroom. I introduce the issue. I lay out some potential group agreements, ground rules, norms, whatever the language is that you want to use. We'll watch the starter video that NIFI produces, if there is one. And then usually, you know, hopefully they've read the issue guide. Students in reading, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But then I'll have them think, and I'll have them say, you know, here's kind of what I'm thinking. I like option 1, 2, or 3, and we kind of get a sense of how the room is thinking. And then we'll talk about option 1. And I ask the questions that are in that moderator guide. We'll move on to option 2. We'll do that for 10 minutes. Move on to option 2, where I ask a different set of questions. Move on to option 3, where it's another set of questions, and I let students talk. And then, you know, and then we'll talk at the very end, and you can see the questions that I ask at the end. You know, what have you heard that's different? You probably haven't changed your mind, but are you thinking differently now about an idea? What did you hear that was new to you? And I think those are really basic, easy questions that don't require, a PhD in deliberation to be able to do. They're really drawing on the skill sets that you as faculty and staff already have in your teaching toolkit. It's just doing it a little bit different way, asking students to read. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But and then putting a framework to it. So my advice is not to be overwhelmed by this idea. I have spent a large part of my career as contingent faculty myself. And I know that for contingent faculty, doing things like having difficult dialogues in a classroom can be really fraught. But I found that relying on a framework like deliberation, that relying on pre-framed issues like a NIFI issue guide or a living room conversations discussion guide, takes that pressure off of me. Students don't see me as the one that's saying something about immigration or policing, but that there's a guide here that's giving us a variety of different perspectives to use. And that has helped make it feel a little bit more safe for me, that I worry less about a student getting upset, telling my department chair, and then me possibly getting fired. I have not had that experience, that most students really appreciate the breadth of the ideas that are in a deliberative issue guide. So if that's a real and substantial concern, and 100% is in these times, I always rely very heavily on the use of the issue guide to provide that context for students. And it gives all of them a joint frame of reference from which to talk through. And that's really helped.
Lori has added a question into the chat, asking about assessment of deliberation. If either of the carers have things to say about how you assess this.
So Kara, do you want me to start and then, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, Kara's really good at this. I would say, we are not in the business of changing anyone's minds, right? And so I think like a lot of us think like an assessment tool would be like a simple pre and post test, and then you're able to see like attitude change, right? Or difference. And the reason I recall this is because when we think of deliberative politics or the deliberative polling project out of Stanford University, that's their measurement, is change in attitudes, right? And so I just want to be clear that we're not looking to change anyone's minds, right? And that has to do with the way that Kara was saying, that we really create it as a learning environment rather than something that can be politicized. For me, of measurement is simply, you do hear Kara's questions about the value of the experience. And so I have students write reflective pieces on the value of the experience or what they experienced. Did they hear something that they hadn't heard? Did they consider something about this particular problem differently? We've had really transformational responses in these papers where, we were talking about healthcare costs, and someone in the room shares, that they lost the family farm due to healthcare expenses and costs. And it has a way of affecting everyone. And those are difficult to measure, but you can get those out of content analysis, out of those reflection pieces. The second thing, though, is if people find value, right, in a practice, they will then use that practice, right? Or develop their own body of work. And so a lot of our measurement is, how have you then applied deliberative practice to, right, your community organization, to your nonprofit, to your school? And so that's where we have developed, right, those kinds of ways of application measurement in terms of assessment tools?
Like, let me share my screen for a second. And then it requires me to move all my buttons. So JMU, for those of you who know, JMU does a heck of a lot of assessment. But we're starting in fall of 24, a full campus-wide deliberation program. So not just in classrooms, but for part of our first year orientation program, Governor Youngkin, who's the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, has mandated all state institutions, higher education institutions, to embed free speech in our orientation program. So last year, we just dropped all the first year students into the basketball arena. We talked to them about how you should do free speech and said, okay, goodbye, and realized that wasn't particularly helpful. So for us to move the needle, we thought, let's do campus-wide deliberation. Let's do and commit to it. And so we have built in an assessment piece to that. And on this right-hand column, we actually have 6 of them. I just left one off because I ran out of space. But so we have 6, if you work with assessment, they don't do research questions, they do objectives. But we wanted to focus on, do students understand the issue better? Do they understand it as more complex? Do they understand the issue, other people's perspectives on the issue? Do they understand their own perspective better on the issue? And we have some survey items on that. We wanted to know whether they're willing to listen to different perspectives. I'm impressed with Molly Scudder's work in the fields on deliberation and listening, and how she talks about this notion of fair consideration of ideas. Do students give fair consideration to different? So we actually will be asking students their political ideologies on a scale and what they identify with. And so we want to know, do moderate students, are they more willing? Do they see themselves giving fair consideration? Do more liberal students give fair consideration, and so on? Are they willing to give fair consideration of other people's ideas? And do students feel that their own ideas are being given fair consideration? Are they more confident in their ability to have difficult conversations? Does this particular mode, does doing deliberation give them a sense that they can have difficult and better conversations than they might normally have with their family over the Thanksgiving dinner table? Can they find common ground and see the value in trying to work together to find common ground? And then, like Kara mentioned, is there any kind of spillover civic engagement, from doing a deliberative forum to other kinds of, hopefully more thicker but thinner forms of civic engagement? Do they go vote? Do they become more involved or informed voters and stuff? So we're doing a post-deliberation 25-question survey out of these 4 learning objectives that will guide how we think about and approach and design an orientation program that deeply embeds deliberation in it. I will stop sharing screen. And I'm happy to share that survey and our survey questions. We just did a whole week of deliberative forums in which we piloted this assessment with those 6 learning objectives as the guide. And I haven't looked at the data in any meaningful sense, except to say that the numbers looked pretty good. But I'm happy to share that assessment, and I'm happy to talk through people who want to talk further about assessment on it.
Hey, Amy, thanks for sharing that. I haven't seen your curriculum. I will look at that. That looks fantastic.
And we did get another question in the chat during that discussion of assessment of, does anyone know of a specific deliberative dialogue guide on the upcoming 2024 election that addresses the implications of political polarization in that election? And I know we put the issue guide for NIFI, for the voter election guide in there earlier, but Kara, any thoughts on addressing political polarization?
It's an older guide now, but I know at least one of the 3 options in the NIFI issue guide on a House divided definitely addresses the impact of political polarization. I haven't looked at it recently, which for recent means in the past couple of weeks. Anything outside of that, my brain is mush. But I know for sure that I think option 2 100% addresses the question of political polarization and the impact of it. And or maybe it's option 3, doesn't matter. But how do we, how should we think about media? How should we think about the way that we relate with media? Should we prevent the media from, offering coverage for certain kind of candidates? Should we demand that they offer different kinds of coverage for candidates? So I know that one, and even if it's, you don't, I think you could probably just take that particular option and probably just do a full, using that as a framework, develop a set of deliberative questions, and you could have a, certainly a 90-minute conversation on that with using that particular option.
And Sarah or Susan, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, hi. Thank you for this great seminar. Hey, Kara Dillard. Good to see you. I wanted to ask, I love NIFI, and I've been sharing it with my team at Nassau Community College, a couple of whom are here. We are looking, though, wondering if there are any updated specific guides on kind of the specifics of the 2024 election. And if not right now, do you suppose there will be one in the coming months to prepare for November? I think Amy's source looks great. And I think that, it really deals with polarization, as you say. And we've actually used a House Divided at Nassau with great success. But just wondering if you or anybody here in the seminar knows about election 2024 guides. Thank you.
That's a great question. I know that, well, I think 2 things. One is NIFI has a issue guide on, balancing issue or like election security and election safety versus sort of opening up elections, which I know in 2016 was a major issue, or at least in the news media. So there's that one. That guide doesn't address polarization and some of the unique challenges to this election. I think that there's a group in the NIFI board who's very much interested. I don't know if Patty's still here, who is interested in putting together and revising some of these old issue guides. I think including the elections guide to address some of these things. So stay tuned. We don't have anything for spring, but hopefully for the start of the fall semester, we'll have a bunch of updated, at least updates to some guides that we can share. There's been some staffing change at NIFI, and that has, to say the least, that has kind of taken on and prevented us from doing some things, but we're back and want to update.
Great. Yeah, we also did use that safeguarding elections with just talking about redistricting, talking about voter integrity, issues at the polls. These things are, of course, timely for any election. So I can go back to that one. Just let us know. Yeah, we'll keep checking to see if there are updates for 2024 specifically. Thanks.
I just to add to, Kara's leadership is really great in this area. I think in the past, right, we focused on taking a resource heavy amount of time to create these guides and really, to make them more responsive and fluid. I think what Kara is suggesting and what the board is now doing is really great, right? Move more towards issue advisories rather than these huge, beautiful booklets and whatnot. And so I don't know. I would say like who am I, Kara? But I would say like Susan, like, yeah, let's make one, right? For sure. I think 2024 is going to be another magical election, and so it's going to take all of us, and the more we can start talking, the earlier we can start talking, the better.
Michael, jump in with your question.
Yeah, so that was making me think if anybody had ideas on ways to like take the candidate guides that the campus election project usually produces for an election. And so those are obviously very polarized. Here's what one candidate believes, here's what the others. Is there a way to like take those and then create options or create ways to deliberate rather than debate, between those two options?
I think that's a great suggestion. And one of the things that we've also you know, and touched upon, and when the House divided, you know, we just mentioned like ranked choice voting, right? And we didn't realize like that would be quite it would take off, you know, as much as it has. And so students are really, really interested in that. So not only with those candidate guides, you know, personalizing it to your local or state elections, but then also really ramping up kind of those trends that we just saw, you know, oh, these may be occurring, or, you know, they may take off, and then they really have.
I think the key, Michael, I think that's a great suggestion. And we have kind of been thinking about it in our own office, right? How do we we've been talking about how do we make a voter guide come to life for students, instead of just giving them like a PDF that says, here's what candidate says, because our students aren't going to read it. I love our students, but they're just not going to read it. So how do we help them engage in the material? I think the key to something like deliberation is that you want to get away from, you know, even stripping out a candidate's name. You know, here's what representative, you know, here's what Tim Kaine says, and here's whoever is running against Tim Kaine, who I'm not sure that we know yet. Here's what they say, because then that's just ends up being, I love debate, I'm a former debater, it ends up being just a debate that doesn't get anywhere. But finding ways to take out and I think tease out some of what their platforms are, some of the like really broad things that they stand for, and then putting those not necessarily in opposition, but putting them on a spectrum of things that we could do, you know, to address democracy, to address the economy, to address immigration, to address whatever, policing, however else, I think could be a way of making those issues come to life. And then at the end of the forum or at your class or, you know, whatever your campus event is, to say, you know, you've heard in this deliberation, you know, stances from Tim Kaine's platform for whoever is running, you know, from the Republican ticket against Tim Kaine, you know, and also from the Libertarian and from, you know, the Green Party, whoever else. All of those conversations were in here. And if you want to know, you know, given where you ended up in this deliberation and how you were thinking, if you wanted to see how that aligned with a particular candidate, you can now look at our issue guide or our voter guide. And that might be a way, I think, of making those things deliberative that takes the politics out of it. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I mean, even thinking of ways to have the students, like you say, be part of that, right? Like, so here are the two polarized positions. What are some middle ground positions? What are some other nuances that are out there? Yeah, thanks.
And I think, you know, I think it's a great idea. I would be happy to explore it further with you, and you know, maybe it's something like Virginia students could kind of do together during the fall semester. But but I think taking it at an issue level instead of just like, here's Kaine's platform, here's somebody else's platform, and somebody else in between, but making it about an issue, which I think drives students more than the candidate, because students see candidates and they think that's capital P politics and they want to tune out for the most part. But I love that idea. Happy to chat further. Let's chat further about it.
Well, we're right at the end of our hour together. I did drop into chat a link to a survey to evaluate this workshop. I hope that you'll click on it and fill it out once we're out of this room. I'm just putting it in again, so it'll be at the bottom there. Let's give the Karas a great round of applause for you know, their information, the awesome work that they do. It's been, this hour flew by. I felt like we just started, you know, like the conversation is just going to keep going. But that's what we hope we'll do, that the conversations will keep going. And I'm going to share my screen again very quickly. Just to say, other ways we keep this conversation going is in our upcoming workshops. So Monday, more just around developing engaged students. How are we helping to cultivate that active civic participation? A week from today, our discussion is going to be on artificial intelligence and the election. I think that will be a great one. And then in the Monday after that, we get Kara Dillard back. So Kara's coming back along with Mary Irvins from Middle Tennessee State to talk through ways that we're strategically integrating the community issues into our fall voting engagement work. So hope to see you all at future workshops. And again, Kara and Kara, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for attending today. It's been a great hour.
Thank you all so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.